Hey, good evening, everybody. I know we're assembling here. I'm Keith Stevens. I'm Chief Communications Officer at PG&E. I'm the Public Information Officer for this event. Appreciate everybody coming out. We're going to work to be very concise and brief tonight for you because we are still in the EOC. Decisions are being made to turn off power as we go throughout this afternoon. So ask that you keep your questions focused on kind of the event here, and we will move forward. We've already covered safety here in the room, so thank you for doing that. Reminder, we do have 20 or 25 folks dialed in on the line that can only listen. So we're going to ask you to hold your questions until we can bring a microphone to you so everybody can hear your question and understand the response. So thank you. And again, folks on the phone, if you have a question, you can dial the media line at 415-973-5930. So our lineup tonight is going to be Scott Strenfeld, our principal meteorologist. He's going to give an overview of the current weather out there. We're going to hear from Mark Quinlan, who's our incident commander, and he will give an update on where we stand with turning off the power for safety and next steps. And then we'll hear from the president and CEO of Pacific Gas and Electric Company, Andy Veazey. So we'll go in that order. We'll be brief, and then we'll take questions and get you on your way. So thanks. With that, I'll turn it over to Scott.
Thank you. Thanks, Keith. So my name is Scott Strenfeld. I'm a meteorologist with the PG&E meteorology team. And so we continue to evaluate the latest global and high-resolution weather forecast model data as we swiftly approach what appears to be a very strong and dangerous fire weather event. The latest weather models and real-time observations that we're tracking do show a slight delay in the start of the event tonight. However, models still suggest the event will be very strong, and if models are right, stronger than the October 17 Northern California fire weather event, and strongest potentially in the last several years. All the conditions needed for significant fires will be present in this event. At this time, we are forecasting strong to gusty north winds to develop in the Sacramento Valley, and those winds will move down the valley, spread into adjacent terrain starting near 8 p.m. tonight, then across the northern Sierra, North Coast, and North Bay between 10 p.m. and midnight tonight. The winds arrive in the East Bay, South Bay, and Peninsula near shortly after midnight tonight. The strongest winds across Northern California are expected overnight tonight and into tomorrow morning. The winds will remain gusty and will continue tomorrow night into Monday for many locations. But in general, we're expecting the peak of the event to be overnight tonight into tomorrow morning. Models are also now showing potential for what we call a mono wind event to develop in Madera and North Fresno counties, in the communities around Bass Lake, Oakhurst, Coarse Gold, and Auberry, to name a few. Earlier this morning, once we saw the potential, we closely coordinated with the National Weather Service, the local office down in Hanford, on this potential, and we were aligned that there was a potential for mono winds to develop in those communities. We are eyeing a start time of near 10 a.m. to noon tomorrow for that event in the Southern Sierra. And just for a general reference, mono winds are similar to Diablos. They're offshore wind events that develop and originate from the vicinity of Lake Mono, as well as the Mammoth Lakes area, and downslope down into the Southern Sierra and those communities aforementioned. We also anticipate another Santa Ana wind event for the Tehachapis in Kern County. These winds are currently forecast to begin on Monday, the 28th, near midnight, and will last till near 1800 hours at this time on Monday. This will be a very dynamic wind event as it transitions and moves north to south through our PG&E territory. And PG&E Meteorology will continue to coordinate and track the event 24 hours a day as we go through it. And we do plan to use the nearly 1,000 weather stations that are owned by PG&E, the National Weather Service, and the Remote Automated Weather Station Network to determine when the conditions are safe, and we can issue the all clear as granularly safe and as safely as possible so we can restore power to those communities impacted as soon as possible. With the wind speeds that we are forecasting, our forecast models do suggest that we are likely to see significant damage to trees and subsequently to our infrastructure. It's likely that many trees will fall Branches will break in this event and could affect power lines and poles in the process. And just highlighting that because it may delay restoration in areas where the damage may be concentrated. All forecast agencies are aligned that this will be a strong and dangerous event. The National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, they have a storm prediction center that also forecasts for fire weather events, and they are forecasting critical and extreme fire weather across North and South California that cover a population of 11 million Californians, and that's for this event coming up. Other forecast agencies that we monitor, such as the North and South Operations Predictive Services, are forecasting a high risk for significant fires, and the number of PG&E customers that are encapsulated within their footprint of high risk of significant fires is 3.8 million. The National Weather Service, there's red flag warnings posted across a large portion of Northern California into the Southern Sierra, where I mentioned there's risk of mono winds, as well as the Tehachapis. And that footprint covers a proportion of our PG&E customers that numbers somewhere near 2 million. The Bay Area National Weather Service calls this a long duration and extreme event, and that is the graphic that I'm showing over my right shoulder. They're forecasting gusts over elevated terrain 45 to 60 miles per hour, with the highest peaks gusting potentially 65 to 80 miles per hour. And just remember, these winds are going to be very, very dry. We're expecting, in general, relative humidities to be somewhere within the 5 to 15% range throughout this event. So as I've said before in recent briefings, we do continue to coordinate closely with our federal forecasting partners like the National Weather Service, like North and South Ops Predictive Services, and I do want to personally thank them for their coordination, and they are true professionals and are really good at what they do. So with that, I'll leave it there. Turn it back to you, Keith.
Okay, thank you. Mark, you want to come up?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Mark Quinlan. I'm the incident commander for the October 26th Public Safety Power Shutoff event. I'm here to provide an operational briefing. First, I want to begin by stating that the PSPS event from October 23rd has been completed. Having said that, we still have just shy of 850 customers out of service in Sonoma County that were interrupted as a result of the public safety power shutoff. They are all clear from a PSPS perspective, but we need to remain out of service for those customers as we work with CAL FIRE for the Kincaid fire. We have an incident command post set up in the general vicinity of the Kincaid fire, and we're working closely with CAL FIRE and coordinating our efforts. In addition, understand that there are some evacuation efforts that were underway earlier today in Sonoma County. We coordinated our efforts with the county to ensure that the public safety power shutoff event that began this afternoon did not begin too early in that area, as it would have negatively impacted the county's ability to facilitate those evacuations. So pleased to report that we were able to fill that request. We have begun implementing the public safety power shutoff for approximately 940,000 customers across 36 counties. And the shutoffs began just before this press conference, roughly 1700 hours or 5 p.m. At this time, I'm going to explain and detail the specific times as best as I can of when people can expect the public safety power shutoff to occur. First, Scott reviewed the large scope that we have, the large area of our service territory that's impacted. We've taken an effort to break those areas up into 7 small zones or geographic zones. And the reason that we did that is because weather conditions change, and there are differences in start times where we're expecting to see those high winds. And so we want to be able to react in as close to real time as possible based on weather. So a couple caveats here. First and foremost, what I'm about to tell you is part of our weather forecasting effort. These times could change They've already changed a couple times today. Fortunately for us and for our customers, the weather's coming in a little bit later than what was originally anticipated, which then allows us to start our de-energization effort later as well. So please keep that in mind. Secondly, the times that I give you in terms of start time of these interruptions, that is just the start time. It is a process that takes up to 2 to 3 hours on average to de-energize these specific areas of our service territory in close coordination with the California ISO, our transmission grid control center, and our distribution control centers. So first area I'll speak to geographically is in the northern Sierra foothills and in the Redding area. That de-energization has started at 1700 hours or 5 p.m. We anticipate the all clear when we can begin our restoration activities at 6 a.m. on Monday, October 28th. Wind speeds in this area, we are anticipating sustained values of 35 to 45 miles an hour, gusts 55 to 65. That geographic area represents roughly 205,000 customers. Second area is the North Bay. North Bay began at 1700 or 5 p.m. this evening. The all clear is anticipated for Monday, October 28th at 0800. Wind speeds 40 to 55 miles an hour, sustained 60 to 75 mile an hour gust, and that impacts roughly 256,000 customers. The third area of reference is the southern Sierra foothills. That weather system comes in on Sunday, the 27th. We're going to begin the shutdown process promptly at midnight tonight. We expect the all clear on Monday at midnight. Sustained wind speeds in that area 30 to 40 miles an hour with gusts 50 to 60, and that represents roughly 86,000 customers. Next area of geography to speak to is the Bay Area, South Bay, East Bay area. That begins at 2000 hours this evening or 8 p.m. The all clear is Monday morning at 0800. Sustained wind values 35 to 45 miles an hour, gust 55 to 65, and that represents roughly 246,000 customers. The fifth area is along the north coast all the way up to Humboldt area. That will begin at 2100 hours or 9 p.m. this evening. The all clear is projected currently at Sunday at 4 p.m. or 1600 hours. Sustained wind speeds 30 to 40 miles an hour, gusts 50 to 60, and that's roughly 146,000 customers. Second to last would be the Kern County. That's projected at Sunday at 9 p.m., 2100 hours, all clear Monday at about 1800 hours or 6 p.m. Sustained 20 to 30 miles an hour, gust 40 to 50 miles an hour, less than 1,000 customers there. And the final area is the Madera, Fresno counties that Scott spoke to with the mono wind area. We believe that the area of impact, severe winds will pick up Sunday at 10 in the morning, and the winds will decrease, and we'll have an all clear at approximately 2200 or 10 in the evening on the same day, Sunday. I don't know exactly when we're going to de-energize that area because we haven't identified the scope yet. We just identified the area of interest and the wind speeds and how long that severe weather will be in position. The next step for our team is to identify our assets that exist within that area and translate that into customers and operating activity that we have to plan for. That will help inform how far in advance of that risk time we have to start our switching. So in all, roughly 940,000 customers. Very large event for us. Very large event for us to manage, but we're confident that we can do this and we can do it safely. So let's talk about restoration. So I gave the all clear times, and the all clear times is representative of what we believe will be able to start our patrolling and restoration efforts. We've spoken at previous press conferences that process, what that involves. We need to patrol 100% of that infrastructure that was in the de-energized state. We need to patrol it from where its point of origin all the way out to the end of the line. From a mileage perspective, 31,000 miles of overhead conductor to patrol before we can restore. So huge effort for us. That represents 230 transmission lines, roughly 700 distribution circuits. We have over 6,000 field personnel in position. As soon as we de-energize, they go out and segment the system into smaller, more manageable parts, puts the system in a posture to be restored safely and quickly and efficiently, as has been the case with previous PSPS events. We're also tied in with Cal OES, and we still have access to that fixed-wing aircraft, which has the ability to patrol our transmission system at night. Due to its functionality, we have a high-res camera and some infrared technology that allows us to see if our conductors are in the air and in the clear and free from ignition risks. So we plan to use that to free up helicopter resources to patrol our distribution system. In terms of the ETORs, important, and we recognize how important that is for folks so we can make plans and anticipate when we could be restored and get back to normal. Our ETORs right now, estimated times of restoration, are estimated to be 48 hours after we receive the all clear. So as I mentioned on the front end of this presentation as it relates to the start time, the restoration time is a sequence as well. That doesn't mean that every customer is going to be out for 48 hours. It means that we're going to begin restoration activities at the times that I mentioned, and we believe we will incrementally restore all the way up and not have anyone out past 48 hours. One thing that we need to consider is damage. These are big winds, the strongest winds that we've had in a number of years. We do anticipate finding damage cases. Not only in the areas in which we're de-energized intentionally as part of the Public Safety Power Shutoff Plan, but we also anticipate some outages that occur just on an emergent basis on areas of the system that remain energized. So it's important for the public to understand that if you weren't notified that you're part of the PSPS scope and you went on the website and entered in your address and found that you were not in scope, that's true, but understand that we could have other emergent-based outages to your home, so don't think that that's an automatic correlation to PSPS. It very well may not be. Just wanted to kind of touch on that. In terms of CRCs, Community Resource Centers, we have 67 of them open at this time, or our plan is to open 67 of them. That continues to increase, that number. We're constantly communicating with the counties and getting feedback on where would be the most logical places for these facilities to exist. These CRCs will offer restrooms, bottled water, electronic device charging, air-conditioned seating for up to 100 customers. We've also enhanced the amenities there and are offering some coffee and some dry foods and things of that nature in the interest of providing some comfort. Centers in Butte, El Dorado, Placer, Nevada, and Yuba counties opened actually at 2 p.m. today. We were able to stand those up a little early. The remainder will open they will be open for business at 0800 tomorrow, and they will remain open until 2000 or 8 p.m. Tomorrow evening. And if you'd like to review where you can find it, where one of these CRCs exist, I would encourage all of you to visit pge.com/PSPS updates, and we'll have a listing of all of those CRCs. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Andy Veazey.
Thank you, Mark. Good evening. I'm Andy Veazey. I am the CEO and President of the Pacific Gas and Electric Company. What that means is I have the responsibility for all our utility operations. Let me start my remarks by recognizing that we have two ongoing fire events, the Kincaid Fire in Sonoma County and down in the south, the Tick Fire. I mention these because I do want to acknowledge the first responders who are currently battling those flames and all the individual residents and citizens of California who have been either evacuated or impacted by those fires. I start there because it puts into context what we are talking about here tonight. It is our absolute objective to ensure that we do nothing to add to that list. We talk about 30,000 miles of conductor in the air that in normal circumstances provides continuous electric power to all our customers. What we find ourselves is experiencing what has been called a historic or significant wind event coming. Typically in this industry, the way that would be handled would be we would sit back, debris would hit these lines, there would be localized outages, we would repair them. But we're in anything but a typical situation. We have talked many times about the environment that we're in, the years of drought, the dry fuel, the low humidities, the lack of rain, over 100 million dead trees across the state, all the fuel. And we get to the point that what would be not a major issue in utility operations becoming something that we cannot allow happen. When debris hits these wires, any spark can be an ignition source of a catastrophic wildfire. And everything we do with a public safety power shutoff and other IOUs do is our last resort to make sure that in these conditions, our operations will not create a major public safety issue. That's why we do it. Yesterday at this podium, I was asked when we were considering taking down high voltage transmission, do we have other factors we consider other than safety, such as interstate commerce and the integrity of the grid? And the answer was no, that safety is always our primary consideration. What we work hard at every day, 24 hours a day in the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center, is trying to figure out how we protect the public with the least amount of disruption. We recognize the hardship of not having power. We recognize for some it's an inconvenience, for some it's a hardship, and for some it's actually life-threatening. And we are working hard with all our partners at the county level, at the state and state agencies, tribal governments, to ensure that the most vulnerable customers are being cared for. We're working with the people broadly to do that, to understand the needs and to do what we can to help, because we recognize the impact of that these shutoffs have. So it's an issue of safety. We often talk about the condition of equipment and whether our right-of-ways are appropriate. This is a situation that is beyond the design standards. Remember, this is about the fuel and the humidity and the years of drought and the conditions that we're in. So even with high integrity equipment, which we believe we have, even with meeting the requirements of right-of-way clearing, which we believe we do, the level of winds gusting to almost 80 miles an hour presents a real threat and an opportunity for a catastrophic fire. And we will not let that happen. For the first time since we've been doing PSPS, we actually have increased the number of customers in scope. Mark talked about 940,000 accounts. That's roughly 2.5 million customers that will be impacted. And the reason it's increased is because the weather indicated we needed to make a shift in scope. Now, as we do that, and Mark talked about various phases of de-energization, we constantly look at opportunities to reconfigure and try to drive that number down. But we will not take those risks unless we are confident that we can shut things off correctly, that we can protect our customers. It's a complicated process. One of the things you have to understand, if you don't remember, is that we have to make these calls before the weather comes. We have to have 6,000 people in the field switching manually opening up circuits that are live. It's dangerous work. We want to do it safely. We need to get out ahead of the weather. So the power will go off well before we witness the weather. The power will go off and you may never witness the weather because you're connected to a place that does get impacted by it. Let me be very clear. We don't do this because it's the easy thing for us to do. We do it because it's the safe and right thing to do. It's a challenging thing to do, but the number one priority we have is your safety. The other thing I said yesterday is we're all in this together. This is a California statewide event. You just need to read the news. You need to pay attention to the weather. It has broad impacts. And as I said, we're all in this together. And the one thing that you all can do is be prepared. Be prepared. While you have energy, while your lights are on, please prepare for not having that power. Charge your devices. Get the support you need. Make sure you have water. Make sure you have non-perishable foods. Make sure you're checking in on your neighbors, on your loved ones, even if you're not in that area, so that you can make sure that they're safe. Now, we also have this other thing, this question of weather uncertainty. And I got a notice, but I wasn't impacted, or I didn't get a notice and I had a short impact. That's because weather changes. And as good as Scott is in predicting the weather, it's still a prediction. It's the weather, and it changes. And we try to make sure we can be responsive and agile as it does. So you'll get notices, times won't be precise. But let me tell you one thing. If you're in a red flag warning zone, if you're in one of those zones, it can happen to you. So even if we haven't given you a notice, please, please, please prepare. I'm sure you all noticed when there are hurricanes along the East Coast, they have these cones of uncertainty. Well, if you're in a red flag warning spot, you're in the cone of uncertainty. Doesn't mean it will be impactful to you, but please prepare because it can. So for preparedness, please check out our website. We have hints there and advice. Use it. Make sure you go to our website and update your contact information, because the most important thing for us is to be able to contact you when there is an emergency. So having the latest information is helpful. So please do that. Again, we always appreciate your patience. We know how disruptive this is. We work very hard to make sure we minimize that impact on everyone. We have to work together on all this. But let me also say, we're not out of the woods yet. We're dealing with this public safety power shutoff. We watch the weather all the time, and one of the things we're seeing is that emerging again as a pattern. While we may have another weather system, not with this intensity, which may hit us early to middle of next week. So what does that mean? Well, let me confirm something we say all the time. We are committed to restoring every customer we shut off. And we hopefully will have the window to bring everybody back with power prior to the next weather event. It's early, so we don't want to talk about it in much details, but there's a potential for it, so we have to prepare. So I'd ask you only one thing. As your power comes back on, please use that time to prepare again. We will talk more about that next event as the weather patterns become clear, so we'll probably talk about that tomorrow. But again, we do this for your safety. We don't do it because it's easy for us. We do it because it's the right thing to do to make sure that we can protect you, your property, and your loved ones from catastrophic wildfire. So with that, I'll stop, and we're ready to take your questions.
Okay, right, we'll start over here on the left side this time.
Hi, Luz Peña with ABC 7 News. Sonoma County has been ordered to evacuate. An emergency alert was just sent out. Give us more info on that.
Well, I don't have more info on that. I don't know if Mark, you do?
I believe the evacuations are due to the Kincaid fire. I won't speak for CAL FIRE or speculate, but I know that that's an active fire scene, and if I take that data element and then I factor in the high wind activity that's coming in, I mean that could result in some movement. So I think the evacuation orders, as I read them from CAL FIRE, are the right thing to do for public safety. So that's all I have on that.
And if that's coming from the county, I would strongly encourage citizens to heed that warning.
Is it going to be more than Healdsburg and Windsor?
We're not the county, we're PG&E, so we control the power assets. If that's a county tweet, you might want to refer that to the county. And if it does come from them, I would highly suggest following that direction.
So today, the governor was speaking about notification and how many people are just receiving those notifications now. Is PG&E going to get better at notifying its customers?
Well, we have a protocol, as we've explained, which starts with a 48-hour notification. Then we have a 24-hour notification. Then I believe we go down to 4 hours. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And should things change, we'll give notifications right up to the event. But we do have a plan, and that's why, as I said, we need people's contact information. We use the files that we have. Starts at 48 hours. It goes through social media, goes through tweets, emails, phone calls with customers who identifies medical baseline, which is a rate classification, so it could be anything which they have some medical equipment in their homes that take power. With those customers, we will do an affirmative contact, which means if all our mechanisms of contacting doesn't assure us we've contacted them, we will go and knock on doors, and we will do everything we can to get in touch. So I think we have a protocol that we follow quite completely. Is it 100%? That I can't tell you. We work for it to be that way, but we do have a 48, 24, 4-hour notification, and then we'll continue to notify if we have to. If weather shifts and it's urgent, we will contact right up to the point of the event.
Hi, I'd like to drill down on that a little bit more. How are you communicating those shutdown times? Because it seems like you're saying one thing, PG&E will be saying one thing to the public and the media through press releases, and then the local governments and law enforcement will say they heard another thing from PG&E. For example, the city of Pleasanton today said they announced that the shutoff for Alameda County was pushed back to 7 p.m. And that was sent at 4 p.m., but you guys hadn't announced it publicly yet. So where's the disconnect here? And are you satisfied with the way you're communicating these things?
Let me start with the point that we can always improve our game on everything. So we're very attuned to learning from experience and improving our game. Now, what I will say that we do multiple calls collectively out of our EOC with state-level agencies, county agencies, tribal governments, and those go on all day. We actually have embedded representatives with every county. We coordinate to make sure that the most important thing is people actually do know what's happening. Now, there are a lot of sources of information. They don't all come from us. Sometimes that can be confusing. But what I will do the following, just so you can understand our process. Mark, I'll have you talk to what we do at the state level, and then I'll ask Lori Giamona, our Chief Customer Officer, to talk about our coordination down to the counties. It takes a lot of communication. There's a lot of information, and a lot of it's quite detailed. I think we are doing a very, very good effort at the moment. We always have an opportunity to improve, but I'd like you to understand what the baseline of the plan is and what our protocols are. So maybe, Mark, start with you on our calls at the state level and then go to Lori.
Yeah, so thanks, Andy. So every day while we're activated for a PSPS event, even before the actual PSPS event starts, even in the planning phases, as soon as we activate our emergency operations center, we make notification to the CPUC for that activation. And then we look to understand when we believe we're going to be de-energized, and we work backward from there, right? We work backward from there, 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours, to Andy's point. That's how we define when we start notifying all these agencies. I host 2 state agency calls a day, one at 1100 and one at 1600 or 4 p.m. And attendees on that call are the state agencies, not only the good folks that we have in our EOC that are working by our side, but also levels all the way up to executive leadership for, the counties, or not the counties, the state agencies, the CPUC, Cal OES, Cal Fire. We also invite federal agencies, depending on where the footprint of the fire is, like the U.S. Forest Service, Department of Interior. And it's an opportunity for us to just cover situational awareness and talk about what we know at that time. So everybody's hearing it at the same time. So I start usually those calls by providing just an operational summary, very similar to the one that I provided here this evening, and then I turn it over to our public information officer for an update on what we're doing in media space and on social media. We then go to our customer strategy officer when we cover some of the customer-related things like the community resource centers, things of that nature. And then we finish it up with our liaison officer to talk about what we do with counties and what we're hearing from government, local government and tribal government. And then close the call and do it again at 1600. It's been pretty effective to just stay tied in with the state so that we're all speaking from the same data set. It's important that we communicate not only to our customer base, but to the state agencies and the county agencies, because they are doing everything they can to prepare, gear up, ramp up, put extra staffing on, take some actions to ensure stability in the public and in the communities. So it's very, very important for us to communicate. Challenge a little bit to your point is, the state call, the county calls, these things all happen sequentially. And we don't want to get ahead of ourselves and the state gets some information from a tweet or something like that. That's what we're trying to govern, and where we could get better, to your point and to Andy's point about always having opportunities to improve with the timing. The only other thing that I would say is that could influence that is the weather and the timing of the weather, right? I've said over the past week, we are constantly looking at the timing of these events, both on the front end of the event and on the back end of the event. I do not want to de-energize anyone earlier than I absolutely have to. So if weather conditions change and I can save an hour, I'm taking that hour off the table. 1 hour is a big deal. And on the back end of the events, if Scott signals to me, weather conditions are starting to look pretty good, we're monitoring our weather stations, our field employees are telling us that winds are starting to die down and become more safe, and I can start my restoration process earlier, I'm starting earlier, because every hour counts. So that's what I have on the state agency piece.
Thanks, Mark. And for the counties, we are hosting 3 times a day calls with the counties. On those calls, we have all county OES representatives. We have tribal representatives. And we cover the same information that we're caring for on the state calls. We go a little bit deeper into issues that they might be experiencing at the local levels and what support they might need. In addition, we've embedded PG&E employees in all of the county OES offices. And so we have our folks on the ground in their offices, so they have a person or several people in some cases there to support them. We also have a portal for all the agencies so that they can understand as the list change of customers with the dynamics of the weather. They have access to the addresses, they understand customer counts, they understand our medical baseline and vulnerable customer counts as we make contact with them. Insofar as our customers, what I will tell you is that these events are dynamic. We are running a 24/7 operation. The customer team is working very closely with our incident command team and our meteorology team. And so the calling of customers can become dynamic, and the windows can get tight based on the windows that change with the weather. And we're trying to be very accommodating and not alarm customers that don't need to be alarmed, but there are cases where customers are getting notified inside of that 48 hours or potentially inside of that 24 hours. And in some cases, it could be the first time that they're getting notified, but that is purely because the conditions have changed and they've been brought into scope. And so we continue to try to tighten that, narrow that, and make sure that we're communicating customers at the right time and in the right way. And then in addition, we're making all of our channels for customers accessible. So customers can go online, they can put their addresses in the address lookup to determine if they're in scope or out of scope, and that's available 24/7. And our call centers are also available 24/7 to answer questions for customers.
Okay, we're going to come over here.
Betty Yu, KPI X5. Andy, you referenced the high integrity equipment that PG&E owns that cannot withstand such winds, but much of the utilities infrastructure is pretty old. It was built 40, 50 years ago. How do you reconcile those two facts?
Well, 30 or 40-year-old infrastructure in this industry is not ancient, all right? What you have is a lot of structures that don't move, which have to be maintained, right? And they have to be inspected, they have to be maintained, and therefore, you can have older equipment, but still relatively high integrity. The integrity of those assets, depending on the maintenance programs that are applied on an ongoing basis, if one does and executes the appropriate maintenance, that equipment will last for quite a bit of time and will be replaced in kind by parts when they fail. What I was trying to make the point was that there is this narrative about the quality, the defective level of equipment, lines falling down, and if you've been listening to these press briefings, you would have heard Bill Johnson talking about that one of the first things he did when he arrived here was to institute a very broad and comprehensive inspection program of all our assets. And when there were deficiencies, they were repaired. And so we're quite confident that our equipment and our infrastructure is in a very good condition. There's also the issue about the confusion of our enhanced vegetation management program with traditional tree trimming. What we've come to the recognition was that the requirements for tree trimming and right-of-way was not adequate for the conditions we're now seeing and what we've experienced, and so we have an advanced program which looks to open up the aperture above lines to ensure that we have appropriate clearances in our distribution right-of-ways. So we are relatively confident that the status of our system is not what we're dealing with here, meaning that with these level winds, and that's why you see this also to some of the IOUs in the south, which also have to declare these kind of preemptive de-energizations, occur because of three general issues: wind speed, the fuel that's available around electrical equipment, and the ability through all these dead trees to have limbs that will fly into a right-of-way, which isn't normally, that you would not have dealt with if it was trimmed. So I think what we're dealing with here is the question not of system integrity, but of fuel moisture content and wind speed, and these the dead and dying trees that are around most of these assets, which is a much bigger issue at the distribution level than at the transmission level. So that was the point I was trying to make.
Follow-up.
Yep.
Regarding the Kincaid fire and the preliminary findings, the jumper cable, did that prompt the utility at all to be more cautious during this round, perhaps to make the shutoffs more widespread, or to decide to shut off more transmission lines versus distribution lines?
Yeah, one of the things I want to be clear about is that transmission lines are in scope when they need to be. And there was a point I made yesterday. We don't treat transmission lines differently. They're more complicated to take out because the higher the voltage, they tend to be in the bulk transmission system and not only impact our customers, but other customers in California and outside the state. So there are different considerations, but when they need to be taken down for safety reasons, they will be. What I had mentioned yesterday, and I'll repeat here, one of the things that we have changed since the operation on one of our towers near Geyserville was that we wanted to make sure that we were taking a much finer look at weather, meaning that if a particular transmission line is impacted by topography, it might be on a ridge line, it might be at the bottom of a hill, we're taking a much more micro look at that, so we have a better sense of wind speeds that might change or give us a better cushion to take them out. Not to keep them in, but to take them out by tightening up our criteria based on the topography around some of these high voltage lines.
Ivan?
Jesse Gary from KTVU Channel 2 here in the Bay Area. I hear what you're saying, but when you go out to these different communities and you talk to people, kind of the first thing they say is they lay the blame on PG&E. whether it's you haven't done, and you can rattle off a myriad of things. How do you reconcile that with all the ways you're trying to communicate with the 2 calls to the state each day, 3 to the county each day, de-energizing only when necessary, et cetera? How do you reconcile that? How do you shift that narrative and the public opinion?
You know what, let me be very clear. We're not trying to manage that right now, okay? I think there is a narrative out there, and that's a conversation and a debate people can have when we're out of fire season. Right now, we have a big historic event coming at us. We have 2.5 million customers being impacted. There's a real threat to public safety, and that's why we're doing this. Once we de-energize, we want to restore as quickly as possible. We want to make sure that people are as prepared as possible to get through this. I think to reconcile these facts, I'll leave that to others, but all I'll say is that we are focused on moving forward, dealing with what's in front of us, setting a new standard for operations to ensure that our maintenance programs are what they need to be to ensure the system and the other programs that we're putting in place to deal with this. PSPS should be the last resort. Right now, it's become a main lever to pull because we have not gotten to the place where we've made this transition from the old world to the new. And it's not just a PG&E issue. When we think about the changing climate, it means do we have to think about our systems differently so they're not exposed to these same risks? And the things that we have talked about and the things that we will pursue, and some are already underway, is the enhanced veg management program that we're proceeding on, the hardening of our system so it's more robust against these weather facts, the use of distributed generation within our franchise area to create resilience zones, more switches so we can reconfigure once that generation is in so we can limit the impact as we start to de-energize. And then the last would be the implementation of microgrids so that we can assure that communities that would not necessarily be impacted can maintain power while we shut off power around them. So we do have this program, and the question of what are we going to do going forward is how we should be judged. We can't undo the things. No matter how much we focus on the past, it will not help us at all today or tomorrow. We take lessons learned, we take actions, we put in our programs, and we work responsibly. And I think the other piece, and it's something that's important, is that the days of unilateral action seem to be over. That this is a problem that has to be solved by many people to come up with new answers for a new time and a new reality, and that's what we're working at. But right now, we've got 6,000 people in the field. When we get the all clear, we'll have 42 aircraft up in the air patrolling 30,000 miles of lines. And our focus is to get the power back on as quickly as we can to limit the amount of disruption we have and to make sure that all the people we work with, whether they're state agency partners, counties, tribal governments, or individual customers, are getting what they need to get through this type of an event. And it's our hope in the future that the scale, the length, and the amount of times we have to have these kind of events will diminish.
All right, maybe 2 more, and then we're going to get back to the EOC.
We're seeing the Kincaid fire right now burning in our North Bay. Do you still stand strong to maybe 2 weeks ago when there was a power shut off? I mean, we're seeing the wind events this weekend, but are you still thinking that you made the right choice with the last one?
In terms of the power shutoffs, yes. I don't normally give short answers, but the answer is yes. We believe that every action we took were correct, and given the circumstances, we would take those actions again to shut off given the circumstances. If we see the weather conditions and it meets our protocol, we would do the same again.
Strongest now, I mean,
Excuse
the wind
me?
events that we're facing this weekend, it's dangerous. Like we're
Yes.
seeing the magnitude of it.
That's why we're turning off the
Yeah,
power.
that's
But this week, it's obviously, I mean, if you're comparing this weekend to when you turned it off,
Right.
you know, it's,
maybe I'm not understanding your question.
but do you think what
Yeah.
you're doing this weekend obviously is, you know, many people are seeing the effect of it. We're seeing a fire burn, but with the last shot of, there were many people who were upset. Businesses lost a lot of money, et
Yes.
cetera.
Yes, no, we would continue to do this because safety is the number one priority.
Okay, maybe 1 more.
A little bit of a follow-up question about the power line that malfunctioned after the Kincaid fire. You said that you found some minor problems there, But were any of those problems related to the jumper cable that broke? Or the jumper that broke?
What we know is we had a relay operation at approximately 9:21. What that means that something in close proximity to that structure showed a fault. And that could be a lot of different things. It just means that something was interfering with the conductors, and therefore potentially could have, if not de-energized or cleared, could have caused the melting of those lines or some other harmful outcome to the equipment. Normally not a big deal, right? And normally what that will happen is that you have something hits a line, the protective scheme, which is to protect that equipment, will open up so it's de-energized, and will reclose because it might have been a temporary thing. We don't want power to be cut off. One of the things we did prior to the fire season was to take all these reclosers off automatic so they don't continue to try to reclose when there's something in the wire, because we don't want to have sparks or arcs happening if they can't clear that fault. So we had the operation. We dispatched qualified electrical workers to that tower, which they were there in about 90 minutes. They couldn't get to it because for safety reasons the fire was already active. What we did notice is a jumper cable, and a jumper cable is used as you bring these lines, these power lines, to a structure. They can't touch that structure, so they're connected by insulators, and the way the power gets from one conductor to the other around a tower is what we call a jumper line. So it's another piece of cable. What we were told and what we noticed is one of the jumper cables on that structure, and we haven't yet done a full inspection, because of the fire situation, was out of place. That may have been the cause of that operation. We're still gathering these details. CAL FIRE is the lead incident manager. They will manage that investigation, and I'm certain that we'll get more information as soon as that fire is under control and we can get a better look at that structure.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. We'll be back here tomorrow, same time. Thank you.